Hey everybody, hope you're doing well today. So in this video, I wanted to talk about something that's very important when it comes to orchestration and arrangement, and that is how we get a full wide sound, in terms of the frequency spectrum without having it sound very, close together and muddy and mushy. And that really comes down to two specific concepts, in my opinion. Number one is the range, and number two is the chord voicing, which we'll talk about in just a second. But the way the way we're built is that we hear the stuff in the high ends a lot easier, and it's a lot easier for us to pick out what individual notes are compared to the bottom end. It's just the way it is. So that's something to keep in mind. When we're scoring something, we don't want to put too much stuff in the bottom end. And I actually have here an orchestral patch, and I'll show you. Like this here sounds very menacing and all that, but if I put it up an octave, it just feels a lot more expansive, and it really helps us gain some clarity in the actual notes and instruments that we're playing. If I move it up another octave, we just hear those higher frequencies a little better, and it just sounds a little clearer, which is really nice. So keep that in mind when you're scoring and you want to gain a sense of clarity. Respect the range of human hearing. Try not to put too much in the very low end, and keep it in the mid to high ranges. So it's always better to kind of have a lot of stuff going on in the high end. Like let's say, woodwinds especially, because so many of them go into the high range, you can have them fluttering and doing all those things, and it's still very audible. You can hear these things. Whereas if you did them in the low end, it's a lot harder to actually differentiate what's going on, and it can be confusing for the listener even sometimes. So that's something to look out for. The second thing is chord voicing, and what that is basically how you arrange the notes in a given chord in order to make it sound expansive and wide. So what I tend to do is, instead of staying within the octave, so in my case C to C, what I'll do is I'll go past the octave, and I can move the notes in the middle, like the E flat and the G, for example. I can do different things with them. So instead of doing the E flat in the middle, I can move the E flat up an octave. And now, I'm retaining the same chord and it's the same quality, but now it just sounds bigger and wider and just more expansive, which is what we want. We don't want things to sound mushy and bundled up together. And if you take a look at the bottom here in the keyboard here, when I usually play with both hands, what I usually do is I'll do an open fifth in the bottom with the octave note at the top, and then I'll fill in the third in my right hand. The reason is, if I do it in the left hand, although it sounds, not so bad in this middle range here, if I do it in the bottom, then you can hear it sounds very focused towards the bottom end. If I do it in the right hand now, that sounds more appropriate. It sounds a little warmer and richer. Whereas if I did this, then it's not quite the same. It's lower and more heavy weighted. And sometimes you want this quality if you're getting a sinking feeling, if you just had a really heavy realization that something bad has happened, then that makes us kind of uncomfortable, right? But if we voice it so that the third is now in the top, then it feels like it's actually, taking up more space, which is what we want. So that's chord voicing for you. And we can basically extend chords as far as we want. So I just went past the octave here, so I can put the D up here, but you can also extend the chords as far as you want. And this is all based on just one chord. This is the B flat major chord. But it all sounds cohesive and not muddy because I've left out more notes towards this bottom part, and I've done more in the top to fill in the rest. I really try to avoid this bottom part as much as possible when it comes to improvising on the piano, because there's more chances of getting congested and it's sounding very muddy. So we want to use the bass range for support, but we don't want to overwhelm the bottom end, especially because it's, again, it can easily get overwhelming. So let's just do a quick example with the orchestral patch maybe. So let's say I had this. This sounds fine, right? Because if you look at the keyboard on the bottom, I have C octave, so I don't have the 5th or the 3rd. You can see that would sound very, very moody and just, you know, very intense. If I move the 5th up here and the 3rd there, above that on the top, then it's a wider and more expansive sound, which is what I'm going for. So I want to take up as much of the frequency spectrum as possible to give the listener a balanced listening experience. So that's basically it. Those are kind of the two topics that really influence how clear your orchestral sound is. Respect the range, so don't go too low if you're trying to write chords, you know? And if you do want to write chords, that's fine, but extend, you know, go past the octave. So I'm jumping into the second concept there, which is chord voicing, but don't, you know, put a bunch of stuff in the low end. Put it up towards the high end, where the other instruments can be heard really clearly. I can go down. Right? So keeping that in mind, keep respecting the ranges is very important. And also how you voice the chords, you know, not just limiting everything towards in one specific octave, and actually expanding, you know, the frequency spectrum and, you know, what ranges and what notes the instruments take up. That can really influence the satisfying experience of the listener, because we want them to really enjoy what we're doing. But if something pops up like, oh, this bottom part is really, really heavy, or, you know, this middle part has too much stuff going on, or that high end, or that, you know, that top part is kind of lacking, then that kind of detracts from the experience. So we're always going for that balanced sound, and the way you voice chords and stuff like that, that really influences, you know, how they interpret a piece of music. So I hope that helped. You know, please let me know if there's any questions about that, because it's a very expansive topic. Like things, you know, you could provide a ton of examples for this, but the general ideas remain the same no matter what instruments you're using. You know, as you can see, from piano all the way to orchestra, it just applies. And this is not just for orchestral music, right? Like you can do this in pop music and rock music. You want to avoid too much going on in the low end. And the way we achieve, you know, a full rich sound is by using all the frequency spectrum, because all the different sounds take up different parts of the spectrum. So if you use all of those parts without putting too much in any one part, then that's the way to do it, to get a balanced, even, rich sound. So I hope that helps. Yeah, let me know your thoughts and what you might want to see in the future. I do have some reviews coming up of the Orchestral Tools products, which I'm really looking forward to. But in any case, thank you so much. I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.